I can't believe the news. On January 31st, 2024, we all finally get to take our first look at Broken Arrow. Hello again there, friends and fans. Raptor here, and today's video is an announcement on the multiplayer version coming to Steam for Broken Arrow. This game is not yet released, and you may have seen it before on the channel and or on Steam for the single player mission of this modern RTS, which looks absolutely insane. And now for the first time ever, we get to take a look at multiplayer, well, basically on the 31st of January for a few weeks. Slytherin, the publisher, is putting up the game on Steam for everyone to download and play multiplayer. I believe it'll be maybe 4v4s and hopefully a multitude of maps from what I'm reading, and it just looks incredibly promising as a wonderful RTS game that I really hope goes down as one of the greatest of the last decade, if not, you know, the top 10 of all time. Now, this game, of course, features modern units for the United States and Russia, and it really just plays a lot like World in Conflict and also a lot like European Escalation from the Wargame series and Red Dragon and Air Land Battle and whatnot as well. But from what I've played of one single player mission, it just feels so good to be able to play it and to, you know, control units and have them go into buildings, and the garrisoning works so well for buildings, and I love being able to play in a modern, like, urban battlefield. Now, we've played many other games like this, as I mentioned, the Wargame series. There's also Steel Division and quite a few other games that are modern, like Regiments, which is taking place in the Cold War, but certainly feels a lot like that as well, and of course World in Conflict. Now, Regiments and World in Conflict are both from the Cold War times, but yet I've got to say I feel like I'm playing either a heavily modded World in Conflict or a Red Dragon when I play this game, and I mean it with the utmost respect, where it seems like just the last couple of years for RTS games, when they come out, they're very well done for modern settings and urban environments. And now finally, I really hope that with the technology being the way it is today, we see vast urban environments, because obviously, as you're seeing on screen now, we typically see kind of a rural area, maybe a highway running through a forested area, but we never really get to see a huge urban environment. And this game already, because of the previous demo, has delivered upon that. And I played the demo so many times. I think it was last year, possibly even the year before, all the times blending together. But yeah, we played this as a demo, then it was off Steam, then the developers brought the demo back again, and I made an announcement video about that, pleading everyone to download it and at least give it a try, because I think there is an incredible amount of potential here. It certainly looked good in the trailers and the videos and the gameplay that we'd seen before, but getting a hands on it, like just being able to play ourselves, is a huge thing. And now Slytherin has some multiplayer footage out there that they're releasing from a recent event, and there's other closed and open beta footage that will more than likely be presented. And of course, when this comes out as well, you'll be seeing tons of people playing, and I really hope that it creates some interesting metas and also allows for the development team to work on some balancing before it releases. Of course, there's so many units and so many different ways to play in a game that has an insane, really a staggering amount of customization for vehicles. You could, of course, put multiple different weapon sets onto Humvees and arm your troops with different equipment and be able to transport them differently into the field. This game has everything that I've always wanted from Wargame, European Escalation, Air Land Battle, and Red Dragon, and even more. It's got the environments of World in Conflict, where, of course, we were fighting in downtown Berlin and Seattle and other urban areas across Europe and the United States in that game. And now it's on a scale that's more similar to Wargame or Steel Division, and even Warno, of course. These are all great games that I've got to say, Warno, Regiments, World in Conflict, the whole European Escalation series, or really the Wargame series, as well as even their predecessor, which was Ruse from back in the day, are all fantastic, like modern RTSs, meaning that they've been released in like the last decade or so, but also more modern in their setting too, with you know, some of the games I mentioned previously taking place in the Cold War. They just feel very good when we actually get a chance to play them. Now, this game features some really cool things, like, for example, paradrop troops that are coming in from above, like way up high, and anti-aircraft and helicopters. It feels like so many different games at once. I think it looks beautiful. I believe we'll be getting a mission editor as well, and it's just something I continuously want to see thrive and strive as it comes to possible release in 2024. Now, anything's possible. I don't want to make any sort of confirmational announcement saying it's definitely coming in 2024. It's going to be the greatest thing ever. But I do truly think that this will be an outstanding game that will definitely be in maybe the top 5 for me of RTS games. And I say that with 100% confidence. But as for like early access release or whatnot, I think anything's possible. And if the developers happen to delay the game, again, as I make mention on this channel time and time again, I fully applaud any sort of delays and developers taking all the time they need to make something great that's not just trash out the get-go or endless early access. Previous games have certainly come out that are not so great. For example, Company of Heroes 3 being a good example of a game where it seems like certain pieces of the game are very well done, but then other pieces are incredibly rushed and not up to the same aspects as other parts of the game. The single-player campaign in this one certainly feels like they're going for almost like a Michael Bay cutscene or maybe an Ace Combat cutscene type intro to what you'll be doing in each of the missions, which seems a little cheesy and B-movie, and I like that. I actually like that a lot. But it also seems like the campaigns themselves, in terms of how they're set up to play out for the player, certainly feels like something you'd encounter in multiplayer as well, although with more stern objectives, which are like, you know, hold this apartment block and don't fall back, which is exactly something you'd do in multiplayer to make sure the enemy didn't get to a capture point or to control a very important area where logistics are being brought through, for example. But what I've seen from this game in terms of how supply works and how the unit voice acting works and just how everything looks and sounds, smoke and dust and debris and explosions all look good. Like, it's not just necessarily a graphics thing or a realism thing. It's kind of more of a realism, but hey, they put in the right amount of time into this aspect, which really doesn't seem important, but means all the world to people who played a lot of RTS games over and over. Now, I'm coming from the aspect of having probably around 5,000 hours total in games like I mentioned, Warno and Wargame and World in Conflict, and playing those single-player campaigns and a lot of the multiplayer certainly has made me look for certain things that set these games apart. And when I played Warno again more recently, remember Warno being that Cold War game which kind of features like the NATO forces versus the Warsaw Pact, that one certainly seems to be a lot more aimed towards single player. I can't recall if there's multiplayer coming to that or if not at all, but it certainly is a well-polished game, Regiments is, in terms of trying to present a different approach to the types of single-player campaigns I've seen from those of Eugen. But in this case, a completely different developer, a completely different publisher. It looks gorgeous, and it seems to just have a lot of extra flair to it that I've wanted to see, and customization that I think will make the replayability and the deck diversity very important. Of course, not only are we just having the United States and Russia fighting against each other, but there's also forces within those factions, like, for example, the United States Marine Corps, or the Russian Air Force, or armored divisions and things like that are more focused on those types of builds that, of course, center around tank warfare or aircraft or moving troops via helicopter. And so because this will be multiplayer, now we'll finally get to see how all these factions will fare and pit against each other. Will, only tank battles be like the most prominent thing? Will that, basically be the most effective way to push the enemy off the battlefield? What will be OP? What will be immediately needing nerf or a buff, that type of thing? And that's something that continues in these games to this day. Even if they've been released years later, there's always tweaks. You add one new unit, and that almost means you have to balance everything out from the beginning, especially if it's like an infantry unit that has like an ATGM. Then you have to figure out how that range will affect other tanks, and then do you want tanks to have countermeasures? But I think I remember in this game some of our units having things like that, like smoke. I can't quite recall. It's been quite some time since I played the demo, but I think I remember something like that, and it being very similar to World in Conflict with its ability for units to have sabot rounds or heat rounds, and then also, of course, to be able to pop smoke or use something like incendiary rounds if they're an autocannon or something like that. Now, this is just some footage from a developer-made scenario that they've showed off a while ago, but pretty soon I'll be showing off some of the single-player campaign that we'd seen previously in vehicle customization, which will be a new thing where I don't think we've been able to do that before in the campaign, and now hopefully with multiplayer we actually get a chance to make our own decks. And this will be something to pay attention to, is on the release of the full multiplayer beta, when everyone gets to be able to play that, will it have, how many maps will it have? I've read that there's going to be several, both playable factions totally released for everyone to be able to fiddle around with, and of course being able to look in the armory, which showcases even nuclear weaponry in the game. Yeah, there's even the ability to drop nukes, I think, with a B-1 bomber for the United States, and of course that'll need some sort of a balance then for the Russians. There might be, I don't know, maybe perhaps a Scud launcher, who knows? Anything's possible. But I'd really like to see how they solve some of those problems of balance, and to be able to also make the factions be completely unique, to where Ospreys might be able to hold more troops or something like that, but of course move slower. There's always a plus and a minus to every unit and every tactic, and so it'll be cool to see how those actually play out in a simulation like this. And this is probably one of the most realistic, again, modern warfare games that I've ever seen, where it almost seems like on the line of Arma, and or something along the lines of Hell Let Loose, where I've seen commanders making the most difference. Like, this seems to be a game where tactics will be more important than your decks and the things that you build and bring into the battle. Meaning that, if you build a deck around an armored spearhead, how will that fare against a very well placed groups of ATGMs in a town? You know what I mean? Like a well-placed infantry defense might crumble or might be unstoppable. And that's something I'm really excited to see, as to how tactics in this will actually play out. Now, of course, I'll be playing this in multiplayer as well, hopefully with and against many of you, and or just trying out, if they give us AI, definitely trying to see how things react in all sorts of different setups. If I can create decks myself and give them to different AI, hopefully this is a thing where we can see how the AI reacts. And typically if you're playing a Eugen game like War Game, well, then you're going to get a lot of spam. You're going to get a lot of units being called out endlessly, and they just seem to try to overwhelm you with sheer numbers. But I'd like to see some tactics, and I hope that if the AI tactics are present in multiplayer, then that would be something that we could see in a single-player match, which would be promising too, because this will have a campaign, and I'm just as interested in the single-player story campaign as I am the full release of multiplayer. So there's the Broken Arrow main page on Steam. When you get an opportunity then, after or probably before January 31st, just add this to your wish list now, and then of course when the playtest is available, you should be emailed via Steam that there's now a playtest available, and or just grab it after January 31st, to where this will be going on for a week or so. Now, I've got to say, this is really well done so far, and I don't know what else they could be doing to take all this time to prepare. And I'm thinking to myself, obviously multiplayer is going to require a lot of netcode being correctly modified and put into the game, and to be able to run against multiplayer, you certainly want to have stability so games don't crash. You also want to not have lag, so that way, of course, it's almost unplayable, or like a slideshow like the days of Men of War Assault Squad. But also, I'm wondering if there's going to be a lot more work into the campaigns. Now, there was some pretty damn cool cutscenes at the start that really seemed like something out of Modern Warfare 2 or Modern Warfare 3, where they were just constantly hyped up with John Williams tier music or something like that. It was crazy. It was all those Call of Duty games were like Michael Bay films, and that's certainly what they were going with here. And I like that. And then the missions, of course, after you went through the cutscene, the commander will speak to you and kind of tell you more about those objectives. So I hope that we get voice actors that are appropriate for each of the factions for the intros, and some portraits too. Those were pretty much the only things that I saw missing from the main demo. So hopefully we get a lot more missions for single player. And my hopes and dreams would be then that we would get perhaps a co-op campaign. That would be awesome. And then of course multiplayer with and against players, and then of course against AI, so people have an opportunity to learn. There is a lot to unpack here, and I really want this to be a game where people who've not played a game like this before aren't overwhelmed, but feel comfortable in trying to play through the single-player campaign, which is quite difficult for the demo that many of us have played for single-player. I think it'll require some more balancing for difficulty so people can kind of easily learn how to use these units. But if you're going from something like Men of War Assault Squad or Company of Heroes, this is certainly a different ball game. It plays out much differently because the scale is much larger. And of course you can control things like I mentioned previously, like paratroopers. But then also you get like offshore batteries from ships that, of course, in this mission you're watching here will actually come in, as well as additional landing craft from the beach. And so you're dealing with something that starts out from a few square blocks to a section of an island or a peninsula to an entire city. And that's going to be crazy as hell to see 4 players on each side battle it out, trying to micromanage so many different things. And that's going to be one of the major things here is, actions per minute or per second that all players are going to have to play out. But that's, of course, if you're getting into the pro leagues. Anybody who plays Warno all the time or is continuously playing Steel Division, anybody who wants to play competitively will certainly fare very well here with, of course, trying to think of how all of the tactics from those previous games and abilities can be translated here. But I really like how this game allows for infantry to not be so soft by putting them into buildings that can be destroyed, but of course a concrete Soviet-era apartment block is going to be a little tougher to destroy than like a small house or a building on the street corner, a small commercial office or building. And so I see a lot of durability in these buildings, and for the infantry to be effective, not only because of their stealth and trees for ambushing ability, but also, of course, being able to defend apartment blocks. And in some of these missions, you actually do see counterattacks where units like, for example, Russian Marines can really take back a position pretty easily if they don't get pummeled by artillery and don't have multiple units firing back on them, that type of thing. So it's really cool to be able to see the balancing in this game so far, where units that are supposed to be more elite actually certainly feel like it, and that'll be balanced out, of course, by them having more cost to call them out to the battle, and or for them to take more supply whenever you use your supply units. And that's another thing that I've been seeing about these types of games too, where it is not just necessarily about making sure your tanks are pointed towards the enemy and putting infantry in buildings, but also supplying those troops. And so this game has it so that way, especially in these missions, you have to constantly bring in supplies for your troops. And that could create some very interesting missions where if you have a unit that's almost isolated, but doing a lot of good job to pin down enemy units and forward recon, you're going to have to bring in a lot of equipment to be able to support them, either it be via helicopter or by like land transport. That's going to be really cool. And that's something that I really enjoyed about the single player as well. So there's already some multiplayer footage out there of people playing. Slytherin inviting me to one of their events too. Unfortunately, I had prior commitments, but have been able to play the closed betas before, or alphas, I forget what you would call it, but now them kind of kicking off the recent Slytherin event with footage from this 4v4, and then moving on to now releasing it on the 31st of January. So this is a huge news day. This means, or at least I'm hoping that this means that people are back into looking around the corner again for this game to release. And honestly, I was thinking about it. Many of you ask me all the time, like, what are your favorite games of all time? World in Conflict is my number one every single time that people ask. But also importantly, people have been saying, hey, when's the next Steam Next event and whatnot? And Broken Arrow is a game that was at the Steam Next event. And every 3 months, Steam throws an event where like 250 amazing games come to Steam for free that are free demos that everybody gets to try before they buy. And then you can add it to your wish list. And again, Broken Arrow was one of these games, and it blew my mind. And the customization of all the vehicles and stuff that you're seeing now, like, these are the things that we got to do a little bit later, taking a look at the armory and being able to toy with things. And it just shows that this game has potential, and it's not just promising potential that might happen. It's like, this is going to happen, but it just depends on how good it's going to be. It's like when you see your food coming out from the kitchen at a good restaurant. You're hungry, you've been here before, you know it's good, but you're having something a little different, and you're really excited to bite into that burger. We've already had a little bit of a sampler. The appetizer's gone now from the demo, and there'll be I guess a little extra appetizer from a second course before the main meal of the multiplayer. And so I'm just more than ready. But going back to what I was mentioning about the Steam Next event and demos, I've got to say that Broken Arrow, if I made a top 5 for demos of all time that I've been able to play that blew my mind, I've got to say Manor Lords is number 1. That's a game that's kind of similar to, think of Total War, but also a medieval city builder like Austrive or whatnot, where it's going to combine both elements of city building and army management, which is amazing. But Broken Arrow is 100% like my second place. followed by probably third being World in Conflict on a demo disc that I played from like PC Gamer or something back in like 2005 or 6 or 7, something like that. And I even made a PC for that game back in the day. I was like, I got to get this game. I got to get a good PC for World in Conflict, that is. And so I've always been looking for a game to be like World in Conflict, and that was my number one demo for the longest time until Broken Arrow Manor Lords came out for their demos. And so I think really in 2024, we're really going to get a lot of great real-time strategy games. And it hurts my heart that we see the end of games like perhaps, well, the Command & Conquer series, like Tiberian Sun and Command & Conquer Generals and whatnot. Those are always fun to be able to build bases and defenses. But I can't believe when Ruse kind of became then into Wargame European Escalation, how different and difficult that game was at the time with hundreds of units, then moving on to games that almost had thousands of units, different infantry setups. I mean, the different combinations for being able to put Marines inside of a ground transport versus a naval transport versus a air transport, and then maybe being able to paradrop troops in. It's incredible. And so it's just mind-melting at how cool this could be with an editor and a dedicated community that wants to make maps and wants to make really fun game modes. And I hope we see other game modes in this too, other than just capture the point. For multiplayer, I think it'll be very important for me to be able to see co-op missions, which I'd love to play against the AI, and set up your own scenarios in towns that replicate all sorts of different objectives and scales of invasions and defense. But also, I would love to see modes like Tug of War and some other stuff that I saw from World in Conflict back in the day, or things that replicate what you do in Battlefield, where, you know, or Hell Let Loose, or Postscriptum, which is now what, Squad 44, I think it is. You know, where you're actually pushing forward to capture objectives where one team is more defending and one team is more attacking. Maybe some setup time, the ability to build defenses. This is something that I think will keep Broken Arrow on the cutting edge of being a game that we've just not yet seen before. And again, a game like Regiments allows you to do that primarily against AI. And so I think we're getting a lot of different things that are like, for example, chicken. Now I know I'm hungry. I'm going back to food again. But chicken, there's a million different ways to make chicken. And yet you can have everything from spicy and sweet and salty and baked and fried. And yet these games are all like this too, where yes, it's the same protein, but there's so many different ways that it can be prepared that even with just chicken and rice, with different things that you do with the rice and the chicken itself, either before or after preparing those dishes, there's so many different ways to do it, you know? And that's what I'm seeing here too, is that there's just almost an infinite number of combinations now for what could potentially be a launching platform for different types of content in the future. Now, again, we have the United States and we have Russia. Now, I think they've announced that there will be other units in the future, and it'd be crazy as hell to see, like, for example, the United Kingdom and France and China and other stuff in here to simulate Squad, getting other factions added years later. And that could create new theaters of war. We could have different maps and different buildings and different landscapes, which would be much more difficult to traverse. You know, China would have a lot more mountainous terrain or open flat deserts, depending on where you're attacking. Huge urban environments, that'd be beautiful. And of course, we're always seeing these open farm fields with forests almost every single time. I'm so done with that. So when we see Russia, when we see parts of Europe, when we see, hopefully, maybe one day Japan, maybe the Japanese will be included, maybe Australia, I don't know, maybe they'll add some really cool factions here. I would just love to see mods for this. Like, for example, people bringing in the Australian armed forces and or allies of theirs that might defend in an invasion, and have, I don't know, China invade Australia or something, and create these just cool scenarios that seem plausible and realistic with how they're executed. And I've got to say, that is one of the things that I really still commend Wargame for, especially for Wargame Red Dragon, having like the Second Korean War and many of the other campaigns that, for example, had China invading the USSR and other stuff like that, that was kind of based on historical events, but of course was something along the lines of Red October, where it's like it happened, but it didn't, but it, you know, did, but not really. Like, it's something that's just historical, what do they call that? Alternative history. I would love to see more of that. And I would love to see mods that brought this back to the Cold War era, and I would love to see maybe different DLCs in the future that bring in more units. Of course, Wargame, a game that's been around since, what, 2014 or something like that, got DLC like all the way up into I think it was like 2020 or something like that, bringing in like the Dutch and Israeli forces and all sorts of different factions just being brought in as a DLC. And I'm all for that, because everybody then gets to, even if you're not interested in buying that DLC, you can fight against that faction, which would be kind of cool too. But this is going to be the type of game where people host lobbies and you can have your in-house with friends who are very skilled, or maybe you're not skilled and you're like, dude, we got to master this game. You know, again, if you're like somebody who likes to watch Arma videos all the time, this might be something that's a little bit more on a larger scale, that you want to see a whole operation play out rather than just kind of like a little, you know, smaller scale engagement, that type of thing. But it does make me think, like, what would it be like to recreate games like, you know, 6 Days in Fallujah, but in a game like this? Now, that's more a small squad base, but imagine if you were doing the whole Battle of Fallujah in something like this. This could be, after it launches, if it gets enough support, the next great simulator, where we can then create huge urban environments and huge almost nations that you could then try to like conquer in a matter of hours or something like that, to simulate, you know, massive militaries going in and you know, bring some, you know, some sort of like stability to an area, or instability. You know, it depends on how you want to look at things, and you can make your own story. And that's why I love single player so much, because then it inspires things that could be done in multiplayer, and vice versa too. So yeah, hope to see a lot more aircraft in this one. Hope to see a lot more helicopters. Of course, we've seen Cobras and Apaches, we've seen F-18s, we've seen the Marines, we've seen VDV, we've seen all the modern aircraft, we've seen great modern buildings, great destructibility, awesome explosions, things like HIMARS, and I think we've even seen cruise missiles from destroyers, which then leads me to believe that there could be more, you know, quote-unquote off-map support, although it's, of course, visible on the map. And I think that's great. I'm glad that it's not just units pushing in and clearing objectives and seems so small-minded. This has huge potential and has already delivered on so much, with it just being a single-player demo. Now, multiplayer coming soon. Again, January 31st, 2024. We all get to play that. And I really am excited to see how the hell people are going to break this down and play a game that has so much replayability. People are, you know, playing Warno continuously, even though that's, I think, still in early access. People are still playing Wargame Red Dragon, even though that's been out for a long time. And this, I hope, is another one that people like to flood into and brings more life into modern RTS games, or just RTS in general. I mean, honestly, other than kind of Manor Lords with the asterisk next to it being a little bit more like Total War or whatnot, I think, what do we have? Company of Heroes, and then we have this Broken Arrow to look forward to, and then of course there's like Meta War 2 that's coming down the line, and there's still like Call to Arms, Gates of Hell, Ostront. Of course, those are more World War II and a little bit more smaller scale. But I'm trying to think of RTS games that would really like leave a mark on the genre and be something where it's like almost a step up to the next level. And I really hope this game provides that step up to where it's like, well, this is well polished, put together very well. The multiplayer community is very supportive, giving a lot of feedback, a lot of balance being taken place, and it trying to be more of a lighthearted competitive game. Some developers try to go more for esports level stuff. You could certainly do that. You could certainly, you know, have live streams of this and have competitive battles and have like tournaments, and that totally is plausible, and I'd love to see it. But I think this would fare best with just having people trying to put as much modern military equipment in here, and then more nations, and then see what it would be like if they fought against each. Like, what would be, you know, Canada versus Japan, but in South Africa. Like, that could be where this could go in a matter of years. And this is a starting point. What I've seen so far is a beautiful, beautiful starting point for Broken Arrow. And I've got to say, Slytherin, this publisher, is one to really keep an eye on, as well as Hooded Horse, who's also publishing Manor Lords with a few other games as well. Those two publishers are really good ones to keep an eye on for modern naval warfare and for World War II content, and for like some turn-based stuff as well. But I think those two alone, with futuristic RTSs coming out and games like this, Broken Arrow again, this could be a really good couple of years for us, so long as these games at least come out with some decency and polish before they're dropped. And I think we're really seeing, even though, for example, Broken Arrow might or might not go into early access, I know Manor Lords will, and I know there's so much passion from some of these smaller developers and publishers that, even though they're making millions and millions of dollars, it's not at the tier of where we're just exhausted of it at the massive big boy tier. These are still, I think, very much projects that are driven by passion and by people who really just want to make a good game for gamers who want to buy a good product. I mean, look at this. People are playing this Pal World game left and right. Pokemon with guns. I mean, that's just something that the developers just thought they would make something that was fun. And I think Broken Arrow is very much fun as well, as much as it is serious and trying to have good attention to detail for having multiple squads in a building. Each building size actually accounting of how many units could fit in there. I've seen some glitches with it as well, where there is a part in this map, you see the large building that's squared off in red there. If you try to put troops inside of that building, it's a mall, so it's kind of done in quarters, like there's northeast, northwest, and southern, southeast, and southwest section of the building. It'll kind of crap out and not actually perform, but that was back at the old demo where those units couldn't necessarily fight from door to door. But I think these are things that can be addressed, and I love the attention to detail for a building size. Instead of just one unit per building, a massive mall is broken down into literally directional, like you could defend corners of a massive intersection. And it makes me want to recreate and see mod makers from the Manowar Assault Squad community or Gates of Hell community come over and make some Modern Warfare missions. Imagine the DC mission from Modern Warfare 2 redone in a game like this. And we've seen that before. People have recreated that in I think it's the Gem engine for Manowar Assault Squad and for Cult Arms Gates of Hell Ostfront. And it's been beautiful. People have literally recreated FPS games in an RTS. And I think it'd be amazing to see this game also represent things like Vietnam and Korea, and for people to heavily mod stuff like that in this engine with this type of quote-unquote realism and simulation, but with units from the 50s and 60s and 70s. I mean, that'd be crazy to me. I would just absolutely love to see that. Now, of course, I think the best thing of this game is just the assets. Like the vehicles themselves and all the buildings are at least enough formula for crazy modding communities and for this developer to be able to then make almost endless amounts of content, so long as it's, again, presented well and well thought out, or to give the players control by creating an editor that allows people to make wacky maps and experiment with all sorts of things and have fun, but fun on whatever scale that they choose, whether it's recreating historically accurate battles of the present or of the past, and or kind of creating situations that are plausible and seeing who comes out, almost like Whopper from War Games, right? An actual military simulation playing out over and over again to see how things go, whether or not you're playing against AI or something. Another thing that comes to mind here would be all of the battles that we did, as I mentioned earlier about deck building. A great way to test them is if you are making a deck in this game. One of the best things that might be good to do, especially if we get an opportunity during the multiplayer event, would be to create a deck with a deck that you're trying to create, like tanks, right? You're trying to go tanks only, or at least tank-centered focus. You make 4 different versions of that deck, tweak things a little bit, then play against that deck and see how things play out. See how well that you're going to do. And I think that would be more than likely the best way to troubleshoot your decks and play against players and play against, yourself and friends, and just kind of try to find the holes in that build or whatnot. And that's a good way to do that, really, truly. Now, watching some more of this footage here, I'm thinking to myself, there was a lot of different things that I enjoyed from the demo, too, that might be tricky for new players as well. Seeing vehicles get panicked, actual realistic vehicle damage. You can have, of course, a tank get a tread knocked out, or an engine be damaged to where they then have to be rescued by a supply unit. And again, that could create very interesting scenarios. And something that I've really praised just from this single-player mission is if you get like an aircraft shot down, like an F-18 behind enemy lines, that pilot will actually paradrop, and if you rescue them, you actually get like some more points and stuff for that too. So this game could unironically create some really interesting like behind enemy lines rescue missions, and that's one of the coolest things I've ever seen, where a dynamic aspect like that, maybe for example, if that's on the opposite team where you shoot down an enemy aircraft and that pilot then paradrops somewhere into your territory, if you find them, that's another big win, because one, you've shot down an enemy aircraft, two, you're then trying to capture a pilot that enemy might not be able to use again, who is very skilled, and then of course you might be able to get rewarded for that too by, I don't know, your faction giving you more points or something to then be able to attack, all because of a failed air superiority operation or something like that. That's just cool. That just creates so much replayability and interesting dynamics that would then take your attention away from the main battle and the what do they call it, min-maxing, or the meta, the most available tactic available, that type of thing. I think that's what that stands for. But anyway, here's a look at some of the units as well that we'll be getting for the United States and for Russia. Now, this is some footage from a little while ago, so some of these things might be changing in their appearance and availability. But again, take everything that you've seen and heard here with a grain of salt, aside from the January 31st release date, because again, everything's subject to change. Maybe this game will get worse. I hope not. I hope not, but I hope multiplayer really solidifies it in saying, okay, single player looks good, I want to see more, but looks good. And multiplayer, it's like, okay, how does it look? How does it feel? What's connectivity like? I feel like multiplayer brings in so many more aspects and questions to the entire formula that, you know, making a single player game hard enough. But multiplayer, that's a whole different story, man. Multiplayer is going to be a very interesting thing, and they've of course been doing a lot of closed access testing that I mentioned before, that I've seen and been a part of and dabbled in myself. But now we actually get to showcase some actual real battles with some people out there who don't make videos themselves, who are probably absolute geniuses to a game like this, and it's going to be cool as hell to see how all those battles play out, and trying to balance units and actually create custom units as well. Because of course, here you're seeing some of the vehicle customization where, you know, a Humvee could be armed with a tow or armed with a 50 cal or something like that, and that changes its versatility. And you know, you can add extra armor to an Abrams, which might make it slower but more protected in an urban environment, or just in tank-to-tank combat. So there's a hell of a lot of options here, and there's a lot of options for the infantry, for transports, for tanks, and it just goes on and on. Now, I don't think we can get down to the level where you can change the optics on your soldiers, or give them different guns, or, you know, give them more grenades or RPGs or something like that. Hopefully, maybe that'll be a thing in the future, but that might be too much for players to manage and too intimidating, and maybe too much of a factor for balance. But you can do it with the vehicles. And when I saw that, I was like, no frickin' way. Did they really do that? And yeah, looks like they did. And the vehicles that we played with in the demo certainly felt slow and heavy and sluggish, as they should. An Abrams is a speedy tank, but it's a tank. And so, you know what that means, and you know, it's a fast tank. It's like saying, oh man, this semi truck is really fast. Like, it's, you know, it's going to be passed by a bicycle depending on the situation. But yeah. So of course you got all your vehicles to consider when you build your decks within the factions here. Of course, you've got recon, you've got infantry, other vehicles to bring along, support, logistics, helicopter, and air. And that's just going to be crazy to see how many different levels of balance you can bring into something like this. And if we were to get some sort of mixed decks in the future where, you know, maybe you could add some Canadian forces that use American equipment, or some British forces, or etc., etc. Those, of course, are just a dream. I don't think there's any set date for that stuff to come. And I don't even know if they've laid out exactly what types of units will be added in the future. I'd imagine that for Russia and the United States, they would add more, let's just call them factions within those nations, you know, more different types of military units that are present. Like, for example, Marines. They've already got the Marines, but what I mean is they're going to add more things like that. Maybe they'll add like a naval unit or something that focuses more on like Navy SEALs and naval invasion tactics, that type of thing, or more for Army, like Army specialization for Rangers and things like that. More heavy-hitting units like that would be phenomenal. But the vehicles look good. Things sound good. The voice acting is good. They've gotten, of course, the whole hangar deal for being able to take a look at all your equipment in 360 degrees, putting in great attention to detail to the models. One thing that you guys continuously always scream at me in all of these games is to zoom in, so that way you can see the troops and the vehicles and the buildings and troops shooting out of the buildings. And that goes for a game like this and also Call to Arms that's on a smaller scale. But when you're playing an RTS, of course, you got to be full zoomed out to be able to see where enemy artillery is coming from, to see where you're being flanked, and things like that. So it's a really important thing to consider in a game like this, to be able to zoom all the way out to see incoming enemy aircraft, possible bombing runs, artillery, to be able to provide counter batteries, and yeah, again, I'm just really excited for multiplayer. And I've been able to showcase all the footage again that I got from all the previous, at least what we were allowed to showcase of the demos and of the arsenal, or the, I guess you could call it the armory, but yeah, they call it the arsenal here. And yeah, I'm just happy to be able to like showcase all that again and to be able to get new stuff now finally. Now I hope again for some co-op and stuff, and I know the developers have a roadmap. I know they've confirmed things yes and no, and honestly over the last couple of years I've heard more no's than that eventually become yes. I've seen it time and time again now recently, where developers will say multiplayer, can't do it, dude, can't do it. You guys want 8v8s? Can't do it, dude, can't do it. And then they eventually come out with it anyway because it's a popular feature that everyone requests. And to be fair, I think at a certain point developers kind of just want people to stop asking so they can focus on the major things of like a single player and multiplayer aspect, whatever they're going for. But then eventually deliver some of those features later and expand on that. And roadmaps are good. That's why we really like seeing those, is because if this is the starting point in 2024, sometime later this year, hopefully, then we've only got, the sky is the limit. And I hope to see, a solid release for this one, whether it goes into full access or early access. Of course, if we launch into early access, then we'll have to have a full version release as well. And I hope that means that we'll get even more campaign missions and more stuff to do and more things to blow up. And that's just going to be cool. Now, I also want to see what the Russian campaign will be like. I also want to see more of the American campaign. I also hope to see multiple campaigns for these factions and just to monitor wherever things go. I think it's really something that I've seen this game do over time, is make some promises that then they give you a sample of and they seem to be able to deliver on, and that's just really nice. Again and again, Broken Arrow is a game that I've been looking forward to now for almost like years, ever since it was first announced. And I am glad to see a game that seems like something from Eugen Systems, but from somebody else. Now that means that because Broken Arrow will eventually come out, Warno will hopefully be a much better game. They'll work a lot harder and focus on a lot of the things that players request for Warno. And also Regiments will be getting a DLC soon, and that's another game from Microprose, which Microprose, dude, is really dropping some old school bangers, some new bangers, Carrier Command. They've got Total Tank Tycoon out there, and even bringing back B-17 and stuff like that. Stuff people grew up with that they're trying to remaster, remake, and or bring fresh and new again. And there's other things out there like Combat Mission, and again, War Game, and not War Game, but Meta-War Assault Squad, and Meta-War 2 and stuff. I want to see all these games succeed and be good, because in the RTS genre, I honestly don't think we get much. But when we do, it's usually something really good. But I think in this case for Broken Arrow, this is going to be outstandingly amazing. These RTS games are like pizza, and it's really hard. It's really hard to find a bad pizza. It's easy to find a lot of good and great pizzas, but every once in a while, a pizza will come around. I know I'm hungry. But a pizza will come around, and it's like, damn, like what the hell did they put? And you have to go back again and again for it. And I really hope this game is something like that. I just really hope that with all the possibilities of, aircraft dropping different types of munitions and possibly dropping troops. And all the things that could go wrong with this game go right. And I think 2024 needs to be a year where this game is a banger. An absolute banger for everybody. It truly needs to be. I hope so. I really hope so. All right, everyone. Well, that is my time for Broken Arrow today. Stay tuned because on January 31st, 2024, I will be playing this live, and for the next couple of days after that, we'll be playing it live with all of you as well. And I want to know all your thoughts and opinions about Broken Arrow. What did you think of the original demo? What do you think about multiplayer if you played it after this video comes out and after the game and multiplayer comes out? Is it something you'd recommend? Is it great? Is it really bad? Is there something they missed? Is there something they really need to focus on? I don't want to hear games trash or games good. Give me some reasons why it's good. Give me some reasons why you like it or why you think some things need to change. And let's use this comment section as a way to propel things that are good so the developers can then focus on things perhaps that they need to work on a little bit more. Like, for example, I don't know, what I mentioned earlier about infantry not being able to shoot in buildings directly next to them. It's been a few months since that demo, so let me know what you think about multiplayer down below. All right, that's it for my time for now. Thanks again, everybody, for subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, for hanging out, for becoming members, and of course, for playing Broken Arrow. It means a lot to me because I love the world in conflict. I have nothing to do with this game. I earn nothing from you buying this game or playing it, but I just want more RTSs, and I want them to be good, damn it. All right, helmet's not a chair. Let's get a hand in. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Take care.